A new report claims one of the most vocal champions of election integrity in Texas may have violated state voting laws. That story and more today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Coming up, more on a new report by ProPublica and the Texas Tribune, which alleges Ken Paxton, the Republican now in a dead heat against Democrat James Talarico in Texas's U.S. Senate race, may have broken the law by casting ballots outside the district where he resides. We'll hear details. Other stories, we're tracking a priestly group with churches in Texas excommunicated by the Vatican, what that means for the group and its followers, and an investigation into World Cup ghost tickets, a scary situation for some soccer fans. All that and a whole lot more coming up today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 8th day of June 2026. I'm David Brown. Well, here we are about 4 months away from Election Day, and Texas's U.S. Senate race is shaping up to be the closest statewide contest in a generation. New polling shows Republican Ken Paxton and Democrat James Talarico essentially tied. Now, that is an extraordinary development in a state where Republicans have dominated for decades, and it makes every issue and every headline matter all the more. And what we're about to talk about strikes at the center of Ken Paxton's political identity. Over the past decade, as you're likely aware, Paxton has been the state's attorney general, and he's weathered a securities fraud indictment, impeachment, whistleblower allegations, a series of personal controversies, and yet he's remained one of the state's most influential Republicans. Even beat John Cornyn in that primary runoff. Well, now Paxton, who set himself up as one of the most vocal champions of election integrity in Texas, is facing questions about whether he himself complied with Texas's own voting laws. This, according to new reporting from ProPublica and the Texas Tribune. Zach Despart helped break this story. He's an investigative reporter for the Texas Tribune and ProPublica. Zach, welcome back.
Hey, David. Great to be here, as always.
Great to have you. Now, as I understand your reporting, it appears Paxton was casting ballots using an address where he did not live. Walk us through what your reporting found and what evidence suggests he voted from an address where he wasn't actually living.
Sure. This reporting came out from taking a look at the divorce filing that Mrs. Paxton had filed last year against Ken Paxton. She had said in that filing that he had moved out of their shared home in 2024. So that led us to take a look at Ken Paxton's voting record in Collin County. That's a public document. It showed that he has voted 6 times since 2024, and his voter registration has remained at the Collin County address where Mrs. Paxton says he has not lived for 2 years. Now, Texas law says that, in general, you're supposed to register where you live, but you can leave an address so long as you have an intent to return at some point. That's a pretty common thing for college students, for members of the military. It gets a little bit murky in this situation, according to the election lawyers I talked to. One, because Mrs. Paxton says he has not lived in the home for 2 years, moved out 2 years ago, and a source close to the Paxtons told us that he hasn't moved back at any point during that time. And also because our reporting found that he appears to, since February, have been living in a home in Denton County next to Collin County, and we had found some links establishing that he seems to live there. The election expert said that would potentially undermine his argument that he intended to return back to the original home.
We should note that as Texas Attorney General, he launched a voter fraud tip line just weeks before this year's primaries. It's important, and you're underscoring this as you're explaining it, that Texas law doesn't just ask where someone owns property clearly, it asks where they reside. How unusual is it that this question even exists? Why has it been so difficult to discover where the Attorney General actually resides?
Sure. It's been difficult to discover in this case with regard to the Denton County home. One, because it was purchased in February by a trust that does not disclose its ownership. That's a little bit unusual, although it's not illegal under Texas law. Trusts can
Sure.
be basically anonymous. Mr. Paxton didn't cooperate with our investigation, didn't answer our questions. We had been asking for about a month, like, where exactly do you live? How does this jive with your residency claim in Collin County? So we actually had to go up to the community in Denton County. It's a gated neighborhood. Talked with some neighbors who said they had seen him there, knocked on his door. He didn't answer. But when I put a letter for him in the mailbox requesting an interview, there was an envelope in there addressed to Ken Paxton. And then we had also seen that he had appeared on a podcast with Dan Patrick a couple weeks ago. His background in there, the fireplace that you can see, is basically identical to the photos of the real estate listing for that property. That makes us feel pretty strongly there is a connection between Ken Paxton and that property. And that would be difficult for him potentially to prove that he does not live there.
It sounds like a lot of shoe leather reporting there. So you said he didn't answer your questions as you were doing this investigation. Has he or his campaign said anything in response to your reporting?
So we sent earlier this week, before we published all of the findings of the investigation, basically a summary of what all of the election lawyers had said. It's what we do for all our stories, to make sure that the subjects have every chance to explain if we got something wrong or provide context that we may have missed. He didn't engage with that process. His campaign did respond, and they basically had said that the story is a tabloid lie. We stand by our reporting. You can read it, obviously.
Well, now, since we don't have a whole lot of time, would he be criminally liable under terms of what he himself has been talking about as the state's voting laws?
According to the election experts we talked to, what he has done may potentially have broken the law. It hinges on that question of residency and that intent to return. What judges do in these cases is they would weigh all of the evidence in favor of returning and against returning, and then decide whether a claim of residency is legitimate. So they would weigh a lot of the factors that I had talked about.
Obviously, there's more to dig into. We'll have a link to it, texasstandard.org. Zach Despard, investigative reporter for the Texas Tribune and ProPublica. Zach, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, David.
In a country full of highways and gas stations, California has long had an outsized influence on the nation's car industry. A big part of that has to do with the size of the California market, of course. For years, it was the top auto market in the states, setting more than just trends, but regulations too. But now it appears the balance is shifting toward you-know-where. Here to tell us more, Andrea Guzman, who reports for the Austin American-Statesman. Andrea, welcome.
Hi.
So what numbers are you seeing that tell you that Texas may be overtaking California when it comes to influencing car companies here?
Yeah, so market research firm J.D. Power says that California's retail share of U.S. light vehicle sales has declined from 12.5% to 11.4% currently, while Texas's share has grown from 9.3% to 10.8%. That gap has narrowed 3 points to just 0.6 points over the course of less than 6 months. And based on 16.3 million retail sales forecast for this year, California is projected to lose about 158,000 in sales, while Texas will gain some 197,000 versus 2019 averages. And Texas is also leading California in total consumer dollars spent on new vehicles.
Wow.
Texas has led the nation in consumer expenditures on new vehicles since 2024, actually.
Wow, it sort of reminds me of that warning objects in your rear view mirror may be bigger. Yeah, Texas looming right up there behind California, and in some respects already beating California. Why is this happening?
Yeah, so Tyson Jominy with J.D. Power told me that a great deal of it has to do with California buyers leaning more toward used vehicles at the moment. They're not feeling quite as incentivized to buy new, and they're perhaps getting really great deals on used, whereas Texas is really gaining in dollars spent on new vehicles, partly because of the high price of pickup trucks.
Oh, that stands to reason. Any sense of how Texas might actually change car industry trends compared to California? We're going to start to see more, maybe Longhorns on car hoods or something like that? I'm just thinking seriously, though, how could Texas affect the auto industry differently from, say, California?
Pickup trucks represent 27% of Texas sales versus 17% of California's sales. There's already a nationwide tendency towards carb load and large SUVs and trucks that exists heavily in Texas. So, yeah, I mean, my source mentioned that it's partly just tradition and a reflection of style. It's also for work or play. Beyond trucks, though, Texas buyers skew more toward mainstream brands than like California, where they're a little bit more status conscious. And they also tend to lean more towards sedans, which are declining nationwide.
What about electric vehicles? Because obviously Tesla has a huge footprint here in Texas. I'm wondering, just sort of pulling back, what this might mean for EVs.
Yeah, I think Texas is one of the few markets where EV share has remained pretty stable, even as sales in other states have experienced noticeable downturns. Trump's big, beautiful bill killed the federal electric vehicle tax credit,
Right.
which topped out at $7,500 if you were
Right.
buying a new car. So since last fall, consumers have had less incentive to buy new EVs. And already new EVs tend to have a higher upfront cost than a gas car. But, I would say that people are still leaning towards EVs. They're just leaning more towards used EV sales at the moment. A used EV is within 1,300 of the average gas-powered vehicle. And in Texas, the Texas Department of Transportation says that between July 2022 and the end of 2025, the number of electric vehicles registered in Texas, more than tripled. So I think electric vehicles are continuing to be really strong in Texas, and Texas might influence the rest of the nation. Does that
surprise you? It certainly surprises me that Texas would still be rather strong for EVs while EVs have waned in other states.
Yeah, I mean, I think it surprised, even J.D. Power, who carried out the study. They were expecting gas-powered vehicles to just dominate, but I think Texas drivers, are just still showing that they're hanging on to their interest in EVs.
Very interesting stuff, and Andrea Guzman is tracking it for the Austin American Statesman. We'll link to her reporting at texasstandard.org. Andrea, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, did you ever see Pixar's Monsters University? Those sports and spirit jerseys certainly had a distinctive look. Well, coming up, we'll hear why the Big 12 may be following suit with a monster deal of its own, literally. Also ahead, on a more serious note, a society of priests with some churches in Texas excommunicated by the Vatican. We'll hear what this means for the priests, for the Catholic Church writ large, and for congregants too. Texas Standard Time Check coming up on 19 minutes past the hour. There's a whole lot more of the big broadcast just ahead. Don't touch that dial, y'all.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT San Antonio, providing education and research for communities across Texas, with a focus on student success and workforce development. The University of Ambition, utsa.edu.
Business and Your Money on the Standard. I'm David Brown. Corporate logos have been creeping into college sports for years, but now the Big 12 is taking the next step, selling football and basketball naming rights. Under a new deal reportedly worth about $20 million a year, they'll officially be known as Monster Energy Big 12 Football and Monster Energy Big 12 Basketball. Players will wear Monster patches on their jerseys. The deal will bring each school about $1 million a year. Conference Commissioner Brett Yormark called it, quoting here, an important partnership as we continue to grow our commercial business. But it's also sparked plenty of online eye-rolling, with critics calling it another sign college sports is becoming one giant corporate billboard. What do you think? Hit the Contact Us link, texasstandard.org. And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Last week, we saw the culmination of a crisis within the Roman Catholic Church that some historians have called the biggest schism in over 150 years. A lot of Texans are talking about this. On Thursday, the Vatican issued a decree against the Society of St. Pius X, known widely by its acronym Sspx. the Vatican excommunicating hundreds of priests who make up the group's clergy. The Sspx adheres to a strictly traditionalist view of Catholicism, and we'll talk about that more, but there's been friction between this priestly society and the Vatican for quite some time. This move to excommunicate, however, came after numerous warnings from the Vatican and Pope Leo, prohibiting their consecration of 4 new bishops without prior papal approval. Sspx went ahead anyways, and now the situation leaves the future uncertain for this organization, certainly, which has numerous chapels in Texas, we should note. Here to tell us more, Christopher Altieri. He is a scholar, author, and managing editor at Crux Now, a news outlet that covers the Catholic world. Christopher, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Great to be with you, David.
Great to have you. Let's begin with this organization, Sspx. When people say traditionalist, I think of the Latin Mass, perhaps. What does traditionalist mean in this context?
Sure. I think that that's a good place to start. They are particularly devoted to the what we call the traditional Latin Mass, the way that the Church celebrated Mass right up through the year 1969, with some modifications that followed right after the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965.
Yeah.
There was a committee that really did a major overhaul of the way that the Church celebrates Mass that came into effect at the end of 1969. Mm-hmm. They were sort of iffy about that right from the get-go.
When you say they, who do you mean they were sort of iffy?
Sorry, the Sspx were.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a little bit of an anachronism. In fact, the founder of the society, a fellow by the name of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, founded the Priestly Society in 1970, precisely as a society of priests who would be devoted to the rites as they were celebrated before the Reform.
Now, let me just ask you for clarity. Does the Sspx recognize papal authority or the power of the Pope even to excommunicate this organization?
And it's sure thing. And it's now whether they believe themselves to be excommunicated in this particular case. That's another question. They're using a pretty sharp knife on this, I think. And if I can mix metaphors, maybe tying themselves into knots in order to avoid saying that what has happened has happened. It's a really fascinating thing, and it would be awfully easy to get into the weeds on all of this stuff, but I know we're pressed for time. So the best way to say it is that, giving them fair shake, right, and seeing it from their point of view, they think that especially since the time of the council and in the decades since the council, a lot of doctrinal wishy-washiness has entered the church, and they're concerned about that. And they believe themselves sort of the Pope's loyal opposition, if you could put it that way, loyal sons of the church. Mm-hmm, I think as a practical matter, what they're doing is basically trying to paint themselves, they're actually trying to be more Catholic than the Pope.
I see. Sspx has numerous chapels all over the world, including here in Texas, but now you have church clergy like the Archbishop of San Antonio warning Catholics to actually stay away from Sspx chapels. Where does the Vatican's decree leave Sspx congregants or followers in the eyes of the church?
Well, an explanatory note that accompanied the decree last week makes it clear that the confessions that Sspx priests hear are no longer valid, and that weddings at which Sspx priests officiate are no longer valid. Now, they had been valid right up to the excommunication, up to the consecration which incurred the excommunication,
right,
by a special accommodation that Pope Francis had granted in 2016 and 2017.
Well, what happens now? I mean, the Sspx has at once said that they don't recognize this as an excommunication or a valid excommunication. The church seems to be suggesting that there is a way to come back into the fold, if I understand things correctly.
So sure, for priests who have taken this excommunication for what it is and what it's meant to be, which is a wake-up call, I think it's important for folks to understand that being under an excommunication is not the act is not the church damning people to hell or something like that. We say in technical language that an excommunication is a medicinal penalty, which means that it's there to sort of wake people up and say, hey, you guys have really fouled up on this, and you've got to get right with us. And then the church says, here's how, right? For priests who say, hey, this is a bridge too far.
Mm-hmm.
I want to keep being a priest. I want to stay in communion with Rome or return to communion with Rome. They've provided for priests to be able to do that. As for the lay people you asked, lots of people, especially in more recent years, because they're drawn to the beauty of the traditional liturgy. And if we're being perfectly frank, it is very beautiful, especially when it is done very well. And the Sspx folks are nothing if not careful about the way they celebrate liturgy. So it is something that's very beautiful, and a lot of people would frequent their chapels for that reason, and are maybe even not really aware of all of the doctrinal and ecclesiological squabbling that's going on in the background. Those folks are also of concern to the church, and the church has said, well, steer clear of these folks, right? And that's what I think a lot of the local bishops that you mentioned earlier have done through their own pastoral letters. They said, hey, guys, that's enough of these guys for right now. Let's steer clear until we can sort this out.
We've been speaking with Christopher Altieri. He's a scholar, author, and managing editor over at Crux Now, which covers the Catholic Church and goings-on in the Catholic world. We've been talking about the excommunication of the Sspx Catholic group and what this could mean for worshipers here in Texas. We'll have more at texasstandard.org. Christopher, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Great to be with you.
Support for Texas Standard comes from HEB and the My HEB app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at heb.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Realtors, providing representation at every stage of the home ownership journey, helping clients understand their options and manage complex transaction details. Info at texasrealestate.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harrop. Civil rights groups and several elected officials are calling for an independent investigation into a fatal shooting of an undocumented immigrant by an ICE agent in Houston. An ICE spokesman says Lorenzo Salgado Araujo tried to run over an agent while being taken into custody during a targeted enforcement operation. Araujo's son disputes the claim, saying his father has lived in the United States for nearly 35 years and was on his way to work. Janie Torres lives in the neighborhood near where the shooting took place.
None of the Hispanic community should be having to have fear of going out, going to the store, going out for the weekend with the family, going to the laundromat, going to the park. We shouldn't have to be doing that in fear.
The shooting comes amid an increase in arrests by ICE nationwide. Reuters reported about 2,000 arrests a day in the past week by immigration officials. Governor Abbott has announced a new commission to shape public education. Our Bill Ziebel reports the Texas Classroom Commission will be made up of current and former teachers.
The commission's tasked with developing recommendations ahead of the next legislative session on how to support teachers and improve educational outcomes. Patricia Doyle with the union Dallas Alliance AFT is looking forward to teacher input.
Those on the front lines know what they're doing and know what they're talking about. Let's hope that those suggestions are taken to heart and we actually see some actionable changes come to Texas education.
The commission will be led by former Richardson and Dallas ISD math teacher Courtney Boswell McDonald, who now chairs the State Board of Educators certification. The commission's expected to start work in the next few weeks. I'm Bill Ziebel in Dallas.
Carmelo Anthony's new defense team has filed a motion for a new trial, and KERA's Caroline Love reports the defense is also asking for a new judge.
Anthony was sentenced to 35 years last month for the killing of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a Frisco high school track meet. His attorneys argue Anthony's constitutional right to a public trial was violated. The case has drawn national attention over the issue of race. Anthony is black and Metcalf was white. Collin County Judge John Roach Jr. set strict rules for the courtroom that limited access to the trial. People lined up outside the courthouse as early as 2 a.m. to get a seat. Roach also issued a gag order barring people involved in the case from posting about it online or talking to media, citing the intense public scrutiny. I'm Caroline Love in Dallas.
And I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas newsroom.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Laura Rice. I hope you've noticed Texas Standard is an interactive program. We don't just share news and information with you, we're also interested in hearing your perspective. Every week, that looks like our Talk of Texas segment, Wells Dunbar reaching out with a topic and soliciting your feedback, your opinions, your hot takes. Each March, we want you to vote in our bracket competition. This year, you helped us identify your favorite Texas film. No Country for Old Men beat Giant in the final round. And just this past week, Texas Standard listeners helped us put together a playlist for our sister music station of 250 of the greatest Texas songs to celebrate America's 250. Our commentator, W.F. Strong, recently got in on this interactive element of Texas Standard. I'll let him take it from here.
A couple of weeks ago, I proposed a Texas phonetic alphabet to be our own version of the NATO phonetic alphabet, which is used by the military and police forces. The NATO version will use Alpha for A, Bravo for B, Charlie for C, etc. My version would use Alamo for A, Brisket for B, and C could be chili or perhaps cowboy. I developed word suggestions for the entire alphabet and asked folks to write in to suggest better associative words for the letters. I'll share a few responses. Chris Gilbert wrote to say that he felt C should be cowboy, for sure, and that D should be deer instead of Dallas. He reasoned that deer hunting is a big thing in Texas. Chris has a point. For E, Ross Diaz was okay with my choice of enchiladas, but suggested that I make it singular, as in the whole enchilada. For F, I had football, but Tracy Little made a case for fixin' to. She provided an example, fixin' to feast on these fajitas. Her reasoning is solid. Not all Texans are into football, but everybody uses fixin' to. For H, Ross Diaz, as a technical writer, said I shouldn't use a letter to communicate a letter, so instead of HEB, he would prefer Hondo. For J, Chris Gilbert suggested that instead of jalapeno, I should use Jacinta. As he said, without San Jacinta, we wouldn't be here. For O, Chris said that it has to be oil. It is foundational in Texas. Ross put in a bid for Ozarka because the O is a long O up front. P. I got my biggest takedown here from Jenny Ostertag. I thought Pecos would be great, but she objected, and quite creatively. She wrote, I thoroughly enjoyed your phenomenal piece on the Texas phonetic alphabet today, but here I am pulled over in the parking lot to pursue a particularly pressing point regarding the letter P. Did you purposefully pass over pecan to provide panic and public participation? If so, please accept my praise. That's a pretty powerful piece of programming. I don't mean to be pushy, but the oversight was positively perplexing. I petition you to promptly place pecan in its proper position. Pecans are plentiful, prized, and proudly produced across the state. Passing it over feels positively preposterous. Okay, Jenny, you win. How can I argue with that? Pecan it is. Last one. For the letter Q, I had quail. Ross thought that queso would be better, but by the way a lot of Texans say queso, it would also work for K. I'm W.F. Strong. These are stories from Texas. Some of them are true.
W.F. Strong is a professor of culture and communication at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. You can find his stories from Texas at texasstandard.org and anywhere you get podcasts. By the way, I mentioned our Texas 250 playlist. You can find the top 10 most pivotal moments in Texas music history at texasstandard.org. While voting in the Texas 250 is closed, the conversation always continues in our Talk of Texas segment. Wells Dunbar will be back with more on this week's topic at the end of the program. Just ahead, my conversation with the author of a new book about the last hurrah of the Hollywood studio system and whether he's optimistic about what's ahead in the industry. That's next.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
You've got it tuned to the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. From a layman's perspective, it always seems like Hollywood is going through some sort of change. Right now, it's a battle over AI. But there are often strikes and mergers and other big technological shifts that shake up entertainment. It can be hard to really pin down patterns or eras, unless you're an expert. Thomas Schatz is just that sort of expert. He's a professor emeritus in the Department of Radio, Television, Film at UT Austin, and he's just published a new book about what he calls the Hollywood studio system's last hurrah. It's called Power Surge. Tom, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you.
You've written several books and are really considered an expert on the studio era. Your book, The Genius of the System, took us from the 1920s to the 1940s. Here, you focus on much more recent Hollywood history, 1989 to 2004. Why?
This conglomerate era, as I call it, began in 1989 with the Time Warner and Sony Columbia mergers. Another Japanese company that would eventually become Panasonic bought Universal in 1990. And the ensuing 15 or so years just saw a series of merger and acquisitions waves that saw all of the big studios, all of the TV networks, almost all the cable networks changing hands and realigning. And it eventually culminates in 2004 with NBC Universal. And at that point, 6 companies owned all the major studios, all the TV networks, most of the cable networks, and that controlled publishing and other industries as well. But film and television was the secret to their considerable success during that era.
Well, this was an era of huge blockbusters, but you write about how indie went mainstream. How did Hollywood balance those two very different types of films?
That's a great question, and it was one of the real amazing peculiarities of that period. It was, in many ways, quite accidental. 1989 was the year of Tim Burton's Batman, and that was I think of that as the first really modern blockbuster because Time Warner controlled the, as they say, IP, the intellectual property. They owned DC, they owned Batman. Tim Burton was really a work-for-hire, director-for-hire on that film, and it was up against a lot of big, heavily synergized pictures that summer, but it blew them all away, mainly because of it was the year of Time Warner, and that larger company was able to control the marketplace on a global scale and also spin off lots and lots of merchandise and other things. That film did $1 billion in its first year of release, which is at that time was a huge deal. So that was a game changer. But at the same time, that same year, 1989, was the year of Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Do the Right Thing, Michael Moore's first movie, Roger and Me. It was a very sudden arrival of the so-called indie movement and indie players like Soderbergh and others. And it continued for the next couple of years with all kinds of films. The big breakthrough developments on the indie side of things were the launch of Sony Pictures Classics in 1992, and a much bigger deal was Disney buying Miramax in 1993. And that really enabled Miramax to grow from just a distribution company to a producer of films. And the first film they produced with Disney money was Amazingly Enough. And this was, again, something that they were able to do without permission from Disney because they were set up autonomously, but it was Pulp Fiction. It's also worth mentioning that just before the Miramax-Disney deal, Miramax picked up The Piano, the Jane Campion film, and they had a lot more money to spend on distribution, and that was one of the first films that was accused of buying Oscars. Harvey Weinstein spent enormous amounts of money marketing that movie very, very successfully. Within a couple of years, all of the big guys had indie divisions, and a couple of them had several indie divisions. By 1999, that was kind of a big year for what I tend to refer to as studio indie hybrids. Films like Fight Club that were big studio movies, but they were really indie leaning in terms of talent. It's also worth mentioning that the kind of the peak of the conglomerate era for me in many ways was in 2003, 2004 in terms of what was happening with big blockbusters. 2003 was the last of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, which was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, and it won 11 Academy Awards.
So you mentioned that peak in 2004. What happened just after that marked a turning point for Hollywood?
Several things happened. One is that the independent impulse begins to wane, particularly in terms of the mainstream studio support. The key factors were really from the conglomerate, the owner's perspective, was the growth of the international marketplace, the foreign box office money. Through the late 90s and early aughts, foreign revenues were about even with domestic revenues. In 2004, it suddenly changes very dramatically. The foreign revenues surged 50% higher than domestic. By 2009, they doubled domestic. By 2019, right before the pandemic, they were close to tripling the domestic revenues. So what's happening is the foreign market is going crazy. What's also happening is foreign audiences love blockbuster movies. What's also happening is you've got a new generation of executives who simply couldn't rationalize making risky indie-style movies. The indie market just is pushed back to the margins, and Hollywood is concentrating just on these big-budget blockbusters.
Well, if your books are an indicator, Hollywood can be cyclical. Are you hopeful about its future?
What's happening now, for anyone that's paying any attention, it's hard to miss. The old studios are either consolidating or being swallowed up. And so we're going through another conglomeration era, but it's one that is being dominated by something other than media companies. And depending on how you look at companies like Amazon and Netflix and so on, the only company that's really managed to survive on its own terms during the streaming era is Disney. And so Disney is competitive with Netflix. The two of them are really dominating in many ways the industry. We're now just waiting for the Paramount-Warner merger to be completed. Disney's already bought Fox. So, it's the old studio system is, this really was the studio system's last hurrah. Unfortunately, that there are periods where commerce just pushes art out of the way or pushes it further to the margins. And we've been in that mode for about a decade, at least. That said, what's happening with streaming and what's happening with one of the things that we're maybe only vaguely aware of is the extent to which Disney, among other companies, HBO and Disney really, HBO owned by Warner, of course, is beginning to blur the boundaries between feature films and TV series. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going through a period of significant transformation, one that I think people are generally aware of. And, this period of so-called quality television that we've gone through, is an interesting kind of variation on the indie movement of, 20 or 30 years ago. So it's one way or another, art doesn't prevail, but it persists. And I think we're seeing that now with streaming as well as theatrical filmmaking.
Thomas Schatz is a UT Austin professor emeritus of radio, television, film, and the author of the new book, Power Surge, about conglomerate Hollywood and the studio system's last hurrah. Tom, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Monthly, producer of Where the River Took Us, a podcast about the July 4th floods from survivor Aaron Parsley's perspective, through the voices of his family and others, telling the story of grief, healing, and survival. Available on all podcast platforms.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. We've been following the World Cup pretty closely here on the Standard. One of the reasons, of course, is that Texas has never played as large a role in the tournament's history as it has this year. A total of 16 games on the schedule here in the Lone Star State, including a semifinal in Arlington. Nosebleed seats to that game are currently around $3,500 on StubHub at last check. That's a ticket reselling platform, one that Attorney General Ken Paxton has announced an investigation into. According to a press release from his office last week, some of the folks emptying their bank accounts to see these games aren't getting what they expected. Megan Menchaca is a senior reporter with the Houston Chronicle, and she's been following this story. Megan, welcome back to the Standard.
Thank you for having me.
This press release from Paxton's office mentions an issue called ghost ticketing. Sounds pretty scary. What is it, and how does it come into play here?
Sure. So ticket resale platforms like StubHub don't sell tickets directly, but they're a marketplace that allows people to list seats for events like the World Cup and then sell them to potential buyers. Ghost ticketing is when someone lists a ticket they don't own, collects payment for the ticket, and then cancels or never provides the ticket to someone who has purchased them.
Well, has there been any response from StubHub to this investigation?
Sure. So StubHub said under their policy, if there is an issue with the ticket, the company will provide comparable replacement tickets or a full refund to the buyer. They said the company is working tirelessly to resolve ticket transfer issues and get every fan into their World Cup matches. The issue that arises, though, is when someone has booked flights, hotels, and made plans around attending a game in a certain city, and sometimes there is not a comparable ticket to provide. Even if someone gets that refund for the ticket under the policy does not cover refunds for all the travel costs that someone spent under the assumption that they were going to attend the game.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there any recourse that the company is providing? They're saying, we're not going to pay for your travel, but then what do you do if you've bought the ticket and then bought everything it would take to actually take advantage of it?
So first, if someone has an issue, StubHub's policy notes to contact their customer service team about getting those comparable tickets or getting a refund. After that, if someone in Texas has purchased a World Cup ticket through StubHub and didn't receive them or received inferior tickets, they can file a complaint with the Texas Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. It's unclear what exactly this will lead to. Obviously, they can't give you a ticket to a game that happened in the past. But Paxton says he will use every tool available to hold StubHub accountable if they are responsible for this ghost ticketing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anything else in this press release from Paxton's office that caught your eye?
I think it's important to note that the only guaranteed place to get tickets is, of course, the FIFA website, which has an official resale exchange marketplace where people can sell and buy those tickets. Mm-hmm. However, many of those tickets are sold out, and oftentimes places like StubHub are the only places where people can get those tickets. At the end of the day, you simply cannot guarantee that someone who has promised to sell you something will not back out at the last minute, particularly given the really high demand for these World Cup tickets. Yeah. But it's worth noting that many, many people buy tickets off of StubHub and other platforms like them with no issue.
I guess I'm curious as to why this would be such an issue for the Attorney General right now, given everything else that's going on in the state. How big of an issue is this from what you can tell?
Sure. So this is not the only investigation or not the only issue that the Attorney General is looking into. They have a consumer complaint form that people can fill out for a variety of different issues. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the StubHub only complaint where if people have issues with StubHub, they can fill out this form. It also notes in this form that the complaint may just be reviewed for informational purposes, helping the Attorney General monitor consumer protection issues throughout Texas. So it's not necessarily that the Attorney General is promising, you'll get your money back, or you'll get your travel plans reimbursed. It's just helping to inform this investigation.
Is there any way folks can avoid getting caught out by these resellers like StubHub? Other than FIFA, is that the only?
Ideally, going through the FIFA website to get those tickets, or someone that you know, or someone that you are trusted. Sometimes people who are on the internet aren't necessarily who they appear to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, shopping over multiple sites, as you mentioned, StubHub's not the only ticket resale site in the country. To servicing Texans in the state. So looking at different websites, and trying to find the best seat that is going to match the experience that you want to have.
Yeah, don't get too excited and hit buy now early. You might regret it. Obviously, this is a story that is continuing to develop, and Megan Menchaca is tracking it as senior reporter with the Houston Chronicle. We'll link to her reporting at texasstandard.org. Megan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. Audience and engagement editor Wells Dunbar joins us now with a talk of Texas. Hello, Wells.
Howdy, David. Great to be with you. Those stunning, show-stopping moments outdoors. That's what we're talking about this week on The Talk of Texas. The summits you've scaled, those sunsets that stick with you. And I got to give a shout-out to Lance, April, Bill, and Susie, who have all submitted their own voice recordings at texasstandard.org/talk. That's how this works. We want to share your voices on the air. So if you use your smartphone there, go to texasstandard.org/talk and just make a quick recording for us so we can share it with the folks out there in Radio Land, because, big sky country here, Texas, lots of ground to cover, lots of special moments, and we're hearing about plenty, some of the text form here as well. Folks writing us on Facebook and via email, on Reddit as well. Some great comments here from listeners. Catherine Williams, I love this one. She says, years ago, I saw a lightning bug infestation while on a trail in Lakeway. It looked like a magic fairy forest. I can imagine just what that looks like. It sounds so cool. A similar sort of magical moment here described by one Amanda Rose, who says she saw a dolphin being born on a sailing lesson with her mother at Ingleside Cove in the Corpus Christi Bay. Marie Baylor, this is via Facebook, and she shares a photo as well from the summit. She says she climbed to the top of the Guadalupe Peak during a difficult time in her life. It was baby steps all the way, but as evidenced by that photo, she did make it to the top. And Phil Ostrand, great comment here, cites dozens of moments in the Texas outdoors. Kayaking St. Helena Canyon, Barton Creek, the Llano, and Mason City, being the only person as far as you could see on the coast, seeing the Milky Way and Terralingua, jumping into Barton Springs, cliff jumping into Lake Travis by the old Air Force Park, and watching gators watch me canoe in East Texas and doing a full midnight float in the San Marcos and the Comal with my kids. So no shortage of great topics, great outdoor moments. So share them with us at texasstandard.org/talk.
Yeah, something tells me we're going to be hearing some of those voices on the big broadcast on Friday, so you want to keep it here. Lightning bug infestation? Wow, that sounds like a visit to another dimension altogether. We're out of time for the big broadcast today. News continues 24/7. You know where, texasstandard.org. Talk again tomorrow. Hey, what's cooking? Make sure to join us as we check in with Texas's top taco journalists to hear about the latest innovation stories and the people behind many a Texan's favorite go-to. It's Mondo Rayo with the Tacos of Texas, Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Tacos of Texas comes from H-E-B. Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Woldridge, Adrian Killam, the George Huntington family, and St. David's Foundation. Additionally, Texas Mutual Insurance Company is a founding sponsor of Texas Standard.